Hello Neighbor 2 is a sequel we've all been awaiting for a while. From its many prototypes and other weird attempts at trying to save the Hello Neighbor franchise, it's all come down to the team's next big title set to release for its official beta here on April 7th. And I've had a couple discussions about Hello Neighbor's sequel in the past, but a few weeks back we got ourselves a trailer revealing some more information about the contents of this game and how it's going to release. Sorry for the somewhat late video discussing this, as it's a little bit hard staying up to Hello Neighbor news sometimes since they generally don't like me making videos on this topic. Also, come say hi to me in my Discord server. I'm almost always there talking, links in the description. Anyway, I'm not going to go into too much detail about the first Hello Neighbor 2 trailer as I've discussed it in the past, but just as a bit of a refresher up to the point where we are now, we've had like one full trailer along with some update logs and game mechanic teases that revealed quite a bit about what this game will look like. From what we could see, the neighbor is to an extent retaking over the antagonist role from the main enemy in the alphas, who was called the guest, and very similar to the first game, we have to investigate the neighbor's home. However, the big selling point and change coming to the game is the fact that this time the world was going to be a lot more open, and there's supposed to be more things to explore rather than just the neighbor's home. There's also been quite a few different characters shown that are also supposed to be important to the story, as the player does some invasive detective work to try and solve their mysteries as well. Anyway, that's sort of the narrative that we've had going into this for a while now, but as this game has started to go just a couple months from release dates, the question on where this game would end up being playable has arisen. Because while nowadays you can find multiple Hello Neighbor games across consoles if you wanted to, it wasn't always like that, and the game for the longest time was primarily a PC exclusive title. But this time around, Hello Neighbor may have actually struck themselves a real deal with a huge console for once, because come February 10th it was officially announced that this game was going to be coming to PlayStation, and judging from the announcement, this is going to be a PlayStation exclusive game, at least for consoles, or basically just like what Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach did, where at launch, imaginably for the first few months, if you wanted to play the game on console, PlayStation would be the only way to go. Something that was pretty cool about this as well was that the betas were also going to be dropping on console as well, which honestly surprised me, because a lot of the time these games will only release on PC, or at least just run their betas on it, just because it's a bit easier to optimize, and focusing on patching one version of the game through time would be a lot easier than two. But apparently the devs are jumping all the way in with this one, with a beta release for both platforms as it is now. Now, as for the people who are on consoles like Xbox or Switch and are wondering how they could possibly play the game, or even if they'll be able to, because while I'm not sure on any specifics right now, this game will most certainly come out on all those platforms once this exclusivity deal ends. Just most likely it won't be for months or even maybe a year or so after the game officially comes out, and I also doubt there will be any betas coming around at all. But honestly, as for the people who may be playing on mobile, they may be entirely out of luck, as just looking at the game, it seems like porting it to mobile would be a pretty big hassle, especially since the first game didn't work too well there at all anyway. Moving on from the actual consoles, the big thing that we got from this announcement wasn't even the fact that we know what console this game's going to be dropping on, but more importantly, the fact that we got a fresh new trailer to promote the game's launch. That of which giving us a bit of more information on what the game will look like. So with this trailer being out for a bit, I'm not going to analyze this frame by frame like how I'm sure other people already have, or like how Hello Neighbor wants some people to do, but there were a couple noteworthy things with this trailer that I wanted to bring up, and the first one was the guest's major appearance in the trailer. Before, it felt like the guest character was sort of swept under the rug, and for a minute I was confident that they may have just entirely scrapped him altogether, as he didn't have much of a place in the new game showcasing at all. But this time the guest takes up the entirety of the intro and a bit of the outro, so I feel like I have a minor theory on its importance. The whole point of this game clearly seems to be an open world investigation horror. However, as we see, most of the neighbors are guarding their own property for obvious reasons, as they don't want the player in their homes. But what about the rest of the map? Well, in my opinion, the guest has always been portrayed as sort of a creepy unknown character who lurks around and stalks, so I feel like he'd fit a good role as being this sort of unknown and mysterious character among the rest of the open map. It'd sort of be like how in the other many variations of this game, like Hello Guest, where the focus on the game is the open world mystery aspects. However, to keep the player on their toes while looking for these mysteries, the guest would lurk behind them. It also seems like the guest will play a role in the actual objective of the game, as we could see ourselves taking photos and investigating himself rather than just the neighbors inside of their homes, so that actually seems pretty neat. But moving away from the speculative lore stuff, I want to talk about the game's mechanics, because it feels like this is a huge focus for the developers, as the first game's biggest issues consisted of poor and easy to manipulate AI. And honestly, I at least have hope for the second game being pretty decent in these aspects. I'm not sure how the bugs will play out, and we honestly won't know until the beta, so for that reason I'm not really going to be discussing that until it releases. But what seems important to me is how distracting and manipulating the characters will end up working, because one of my favorite parts about Hello Neighbor, more specifically the earlier versions of it, were the gimmicky and fun ways of distracting the neighbor. You could break a window and wait for him to come investigate, or start an alarm clock and throw it somewhere until he turns it off. Those aspects were what made the game so interesting because it made the neighbor feel so alive. However, where the first game really fell short in those aspects was their overall practicality, because to be honest, most of these features ended up becoming pretty useless over time. And it actually just became 10 times more efficient to just keep running from the neighbor, rather than going through and trying to play the game how it's actually supposed to be played. Which was supposed to be by sneaking around and trying not to get caught. Anyway, if we look at some of these Hello Neighbor 2 trailers, these gimmicks seem to have been making a return, at least conceptually, which I love. For example, in this PlayStation trailer, the player is seen going in and taking a donut from the police officer's home, and then proceeding to use the same donut the next day to distract a guard dog, buying him enough time to climb on top of the home it was originally guarding. Things like this have always been what made Hello Neighbor initially feel super unique to me. So, assuming these cool little ways of playing the game work out how they're supposed to, I can already see this being one hell of a game. Now, the final thing and one of the most interesting topics that I want to talk about is the direction of the game and where it's going to take its story. Because if you're watching this video as somebody who has played and stayed loyal to Hello Neighbor to this moment despite all these issues, I imagine it's most likely for the lore. Because while even those aspects grew quite poor in the first Hello Neighbor, it was still by far the most engaging part of the entire game. But what I'm really wondering about is the state of the lore going into the second title, because honestly, Hello Neighbor has been doing something that has been sort of a red flag in my eyes. That of which has just been them being incredibly vague about everything for seemingly no reason. We have secret characters like the Man in the Hat showing up all the time, along with a bunch of lore secrets throughout the alphas that have been almost meaningless in the grand scheme of things. This is a pattern that has happened ever since the first game, when everything seemed to end in a dream. And I assume the reason behind keeping things vague is to leave it open for debating and theorizing, but all it's really done is make the games overall feel unsatisfying, as not once has there ever been any concrete evidence of literally anything. And all beating these games has done is made the lore more confusing, when I feel like progressing through the title should actually make things a lot clearer. Hopefully this is an issue that ends up being fixed, and I do honestly have hope, because as mentioned, this is a game that has been taken very seriously, unlike the other many titles that you may have never even heard of because they were just kind of lazy throwaways, just taking shots in the dark hoping something would hit. But this time TinyBuild went silent for a year or so, said they were working on something big, and came out with something that up to this point has sort of matched that description. I understand that for some of you it may be hard to get excited for this game considering the developer's bad track record, and I think I could be a bit naive to assume things may actually end up going to plan for once, but at least if nothing else, this is by far the most time and effort TinyBuild and Eerie Guests have ever put into a Hello Neighbor project. The game may come out buggy and messy, and the community may still be more toxic and children-filled than a McDonald's play place, but for now I'm going to be more optimistic for this game specifically, but I won't be afraid and haven't been to criticize this game in the future. For example, I made a whole video going a lot more in depth on the negatives of the first game. Go check it out. I'll see you guys next time. Join the Discord, subscribe, let's hit 100k, and peace.